Hi BookTube, it's Amy. I'm here for my Friday reads. So in the past week I finished 3 books and I've started 2 new books here. So I have here Dusty Answer by Rosamund Leman, which I talked a bit about in my Friday reads last week. This is an English novel from 1927 about Judith and her coming of age, so to speak. It begins with her at the age of 18, reminiscing on the childhood summers spent with the children next door who are all cousins, and it ends with her as a young woman, having gone to college, having had several romantic relationships, and deciding what to do with her life next. And I actually really love the ending because it took a turn I didn't expect. Based on the time, based on the way the novel was going, I more or less expected her to, choose someone and live happily ever after. But it had a very ambiguous ending, and it was very much of the sense that, this was just a chapter in Judith's life, and this is where our story ends, but this is not where her story ends. It was simply where we as the reader are dropping out of her story, dropping out of following her life. And one of the other things I loved about this novel too is how nonchalantly it treated what appear to be romantic relationships between same-sex couples. So, for instance, she meets a woman by the name of Jennifer when she goes to college, and it is subtly and not so subtly hinted at that they have some sort of relationship, that they are together. They become inseparable. They spend all their time together. Judith has these intense feelings towards Jennifer, and it's suggested that Jennifer has these intense feelings towards towards Judith rather. And it's just treated as, something natural. It's not even discussed as something that could possibly be wrong. And there is another relationship between 2 men in the novel of that similar flavor. It's treated in the same way, and it's even given to Judith sort of as an option at the end that she might have this happily ever after with Jennifer. And she goes to a place at an appointed time to meet Jennifer and is considering, traveling with her, living with her. And it's not even discussed as something that could be controversial. It just is within this novel, and I think I like that about it. And overall, an excellent novel. And then I read Canada's Treasure Hunt by Alex Storm, as told by Brian Shaw, which is the story of 3 men, mainly Alex Storm, who sort of led the hunt for the treasure for about 5 years. Their discovery of the lost treasure of the French ship Le Chameau, which went down in Canadian waters in the 1700s. And after, searching with several crews, getting the right permits, he finally puts together a treasure hunting crew of him and 2 other guys. They sign a contract together. They get a boat, a rather leaky boat, a boat that keeps breaking down on them. And out they go when the weather is good on their weekends, on all the days off. And they sort of create a grid on the ocean floor and with buoys and whatnot, tracing where they believe the ship is. And then they find it, and they find not only silver coins, but they find gold coins too. And of course they have, a permit from the government. They've laid legal claim to whatever treasure they find within this spot of land, with a percentage, of course, going to the government should they find anything. But the kicker is, when they find it, they can't tell anyone yet. They tell their wives, but they can't even tell, the fishermen on the wharf when they come in, because they need to make sure they excavate all the treasure before anyone else knows it's there and moves in on their find. And so eventually, when they decide they just have too much and they need to put it in a bank, The one guy has to call up the bank, and it's a fairly small town, so the banker knows him, and he calls up the bank and he says, I've got some money, some gold that needs to be deposited in a safety deposit box. And the banker ends up saying, I don't think we have enough room for what you're describing as potentially several $1 million worth of historical coins. And then, of course, part of the book is about the legal battle that ensued, because Alex Storm had been in previous agreements with other treasure hunters, other salvagers in years previous, and he thought, or he felt, those partnerships had been dissolved. He thought that, legally those partnerships were over, but of course those quite literal gold diggers who had helped him search for the treasure 4 or 5 years before swooped in and said, well, our partnership was still legally binding, part of that treasure belongs to us. And I don't know how I feel about that, because yes, they did help to search in 61, but he didn't find the treasure until 65, long after the ship that his previous partners were using to salvage was, out of service, long after they had tried to hunt for treasure together. And so had essentially been, 3 or 4 years since those guys had taken part in any treasure hunting. And he still wanted to search for the treasure, so he formed a new crew, and they are the ones who found the spot where the ship was. They're the ones who went to the work of hauling the treasure up, and a judge actually did end up awarding these other guys a percentage of the treasure, which I don't think was quite fair, but I guess from a legal point of view, the partnership he had entered into was still valid and still in existence, and so the judge really had no choice but to give these other guys a percentage of the treasure from a legal standpoint. So that was quite interesting. And then I read Jacob's Room, which is the first Virginia Woolf novel I've ever read, and I loved it. I loved it so much that I went out and I bought another Virginia Woolf novel, Mrs. Dalloway. And Jacob's Room follows the life of a young man named Jacob, and which is what is Virginia Woolf's style, where you're a little bit far removed from the character. It's like you're coming in and out of spaces and rooms and conversations and perspectives, and through these little snapshots of people's lives and through these snapshot perspectives, we are putting together his story. And he starts the novel as a little boy picking up a skull on the beach with his mother, and ends the novel in the military fighting in World War I. And I really loved it. Normally, I think from any other author, it's something that I would have found it difficult to stay interested in, but Virginia Woolf's writing is just so rich that it did keep my interest. And all throughout there were lines where I was like, hey, that's pretty good. Oh, I really like that. So for instance, here we have, the point is, however, that we have been brought up in an allusion talking about Jacob's trip to Greece and to Italy. I believe he also went to Italy. But just the perspectives that emerge here and the introspection, I like it very much. So I read that. And then yesterday I started in on The Prime Minister by Anthony Trollope. I'm quite enjoying this one as well. So we have Mr. Wharton, and we also have his daughter, Emily Wharton. And then, of course, we have Fernando Lopez, who is in love with Emily. And there's this whole scene where Ferdinand goes to Mr. Wharton to ask for permission to speak to his daughter Emily about marriage. And Mr. Wharton is quite taken aback because he was not expecting this. It's almost an affront. A man you barely know walks into your house. You don't know anything about him, about his family, about how he makes his money. You've only had a few conversations with him. He's been to a dinner a few times at your house. He walks in and says he wants to marry your daughter. I can see why Mr. Wharton was a little bit offended, but Mr. Wharton is also pretty rude here because he tells him, no, I don't want you to marry my daughter. One, because you're not an English gentleman. I know nothing about you, and you've just told me that your father was Portuguese, and even though you told me you go to church, you're obviously not Christian. And so there's this confrontational scene between them, but then we find out, of course, that Emily is indeed in love with Ferdinand and wants to marry him, but not against her father's wishes. And we also get hints that Ferdinand is not as wealthy as he would make himself out to be. In fact, he's just taken out a £750 loan. And then, of course, we have the other storyline that's emerged here, which is the Duke of Omnium, I think. I've not encountered him too much in the other novels within the Palliser series I've read yet. He's been more of a side character, but in this novel, he has just been asked to be Prime Minister, and his wife is, I think, about to go absolutely crazy socially. She's about to launch these parties, and there is a rather clever and comical comparison comparing her to Lady Macbeth. She is ready to help her husband take the throne, and she is ready to do whatever necessary to ensure that he is successful and that she is successful. She is described as someone who already has all the social position and all the wealth that most people would ever want. And really the only thing left that could have raised her higher in her position in life was for her husband to be Prime Minister, and she is thrilled, she is elated, and so I'm interested to see how much of a mess she manages to make of things. And I'm also interested to see if Ferdinand ends up marrying Emily, and I believe that he does, but I don't think he's going to get the money that he intended to get, and I'm not sure whether he's really in love with her or not. He claims to be in love with her, he behaves as if he's in love with her, but she's also extremely wealthy, and this is a guy who never does anything that's not calculated and is very conscious of his social position and of his ability to spend money, which to him indicates social position. It is described, he's described as never having anyone back to his home. No one has ever really seen the inside of his apartment, but he puts on this front of being wealthy, and when it's his turn to entertain, he'll entertain people in a restaurant or in a private club. And so he very much seems to be a gentleman. He's well liked, but at the same time he is elusive. Nobody really knows anything about him, which I think is going to lead to the downfall of many a character within this book. And now today I was just sitting and beginning to read this big tome of a biography, The Honorable Alex Mackenzie, His Life and Times by W.M. Buckingham, which is one I picked up yesterday at Black Squirrel Books. And I'm going to be very gentle with it because the leather spine is cracked all the way here and it's split up here and there's a tiny hole. And I'd rather not have this give out on my watch. But it's a very attractive book, to open, and the font is very attractive as well. So we'll see how far I get in this weekend. I've got just today and then the weekend, and then I'm back to work on Monday after my week-long vacation. It wasn't quite the vacation week I had planned. I'd hoped to get out and actually do some hiking, but I got rained out in the early part of the week. And now, of course, it's it's the weekend and I'm not too keen on going out to a hiking trail where I know it's going to be fairly busy, but I may still get out along the Ottawa River Trail tomorrow or Sunday, which would be quite nice. But that is what I am up to. Do let me know in the comments below what you're reading, if you've read any of these, and have a lovely Friday.